Hey everyone, welcome to the Seller Finance and Creative Deals podcast. I'm Dan Deppen, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the regulations and compliance rules around seller finance and originating notes, particularly when your borrower is going to be an owner-occupant. It's an area that kind of creates undue confusion and in some cases fear on the part of investors. It's an area that I've really nerded out on for about the last year and a half, and I'm not an attorney, but I feel like I know it better than most. And hopefully today I can simplify all of that for you and make it a little less scary and actually show that it's not, it's something you should pay attention to, but not something that should necessarily, be a source of fear or really, driving your business in some way. I think a lot of the hype around Dodd-Frank and other things is people have kind of emotional reactions to it and it gets a little bit overblown. But before I get into that, just some kind of updates of what I have going on. So I will be at Node Expo here in Dallas coming up shortly, November 7th and 8th. So if you caught the last episode, I had AD Speed, who's nice enough to come on and talk about that a little bit. As far as note buying, that is the biggest event of the year. I think they typically get like 700 plus people. A lot of the content, it sounds like from what Eddie said, they're going to have some kind of new and interesting content. A lot of the note buying content, for me, anyways, is fairly basic if you've been at it for a while, but it's great if you're new. But what I really go there for is all the networking, right? There's a lot of people that I see pretty much once a year, and I see them there. So, it might be last minute at this point, but if you haven't got a ticket, gone down to check that out, it's something I definitely recommend. And then the other thing I did somewhat recently that I never, kind of talked about afterwards was I went to the Paper Trail Conference put on in Arizona. That was another really good event. It was the first year for that one, much smaller, but a more intimate crowd. And there were a lot of note creators there as well. So I met a bunch of people who are already called the underwriter clients or who are looking to create notes. So that was good. Also got to meet William Tingle, who gave a session talking about subject two. And he's someone I've been going back and forth with. I will have him on the podcast here at some point. He's a guy who's been at creative finance for a long time and I think has some really interesting perspectives on how to go about it. So that'll be fun as well. And then let's see. So this is going to come out basically the week of the October 22nd, 23rd, depending on when I get it out. And then the other thing that I've been working on is what I'm calling my Note Copilot AI. So that will be coming out Sunday, October 26th. What this is it's basically a private GPT for note investing and a little bit of creative finance. So what I've done is I've taken all the transcripts from my Note Launchpad course, which that's like 30 hours worth of stuff on its own, certain podcasts, a lot of my internal data that I've uploaded to that, different case studies, different things. Overall, it was like 160 data sources I ended up with altogether. And so what you can do is if you're in any phase of the note buying or note operating process, you basically just ask it questions. Hey, what do I do next? Help me analyze this. Help me price this. What's the return on this? What else should I be thinking about? How do I make this decision? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I've had it in beta for several weeks. I've had a small number of trusted users checking that out. And then what I'm actually able to do is go in there and kind of tune the answers it gets. So I've been, brushing that up and now I've got it to the point where I'm ready to release it. So if you're on the Fusion Notes email list, look to hear about that on Sunday. I've also been sending out some emails kind of showing examples to people of how that's going to work. So it's something I'm really excited about. It's kind of a cool project. I don't know of anything in note investing like quite like that people have created. So the idea, right, is if you want to learn how to buy notes, it's kind of hard. And, traditionally you do these different programs that are sometimes exorbitantly expensive. You're doing them live and then you got to try to remember and take notes. When I created Launchpad a few years ago originally, although there's been several updates since then, the idea for that is, hey, you've got lifetime access to all these videos, so you can go back and reference them later. You can go at your own pace. You can pick and choose. And it's at a price point that if you just do one small deal, like it pays for itself. So it's a no-brainer cost-wise. That was great. Copilot is kind of the next, excuse me, sorry, I'm fighting a cough. It's kind of the next iteration in that, right? Where instead of having to reference 30 hours of videos in a course and all this material, you just ask the question, get the answer right then, right? So kind of your personal GPT for note investing. So I may do a webinar. I may do some other stuff on that, later this fall. But I just mentioned that that's coming out, and I'll throw a link to that in the show notes as well. Okay, but let's get into kind of the meat of this, which is talking about some of the seller finance compliance rules and what's going on there. So I'll also put a link in the show notes. There's on the Call the Underwriter website, I've got a link to a PDF that kind of summarizes some of these things. So when we talk about the rules on creating notes, seller finance, right? There's actually a bunch of different rules, a lot of which have been put in place over decades, and they kind of overlap and they have gray areas, and that's why there's all this confusion. So what I'm trying to do here is kind of boil them down. So the two big rules to be aware of are one, Dodd-Frank, which you've probably heard of, and I'm not going to do a deep dive on Dodd-Frank, but the high level of the 30,000-foot view of that is if you're going to make a loan to somebody and it's their primary residence, meaning if they can't pay the loan for whatever reason, somebody's going to lose their primary residence. And really that's the trigger from when a lot of these rules kick in. Well, what Dodd-Frank says is you have to validate that your borrower has the ability to make payments. Okay. Which for most of you, hopefully, is like just a no-brainer, right? If I'm making a loan to somebody, I kind of want to know that they can pay me back. So I would say with Dodd-Frank and really most all these rules, the consumer rules around seller finance are really, as I've distilled this down, they're telling me to do things that I kind of want to do anyways and are in my own best interests as a lender. But Dodd-Frank is like big one, number one. And then the second one is called TRID, which is an amalgamation of acronyms. Again, I'm not going to deep dive on TRID, but the high level summary of that just means you've got to send a loan estimate to your borrower 7 business days before you close, and a closing disclosure 3 business days before you close. And the intent behind this is so that your borrower, should they so desire, has the ability to go through all the fine print, right? They don't want lenders changing terms and, shoving a piece of paper in front of somebody at closing and say, here, go sign without reading it. Again, it's really in your best interest as a lender anyways, right? Because I've bought a lot of non-performing notes, right? And defaulted notes. And it's fairly common, story you hear from a borrower that they had some different understanding with their original lender on how things were going to work, right? So when you have misunderstandings, misalignments, that's when loans go into default. So it's always a good practice in creative finance in general, whether you're just creating a note or, you're doing some kind of subject to a wrap or something more complicated, to disclose, right? It's really in everybody's best interest. Everybody's going to be happy. You're going to have a better borrower that performs better. So Dodd-Frank, TRID, those are kind of the two main rules I'm going to talk about. And yeah, there's a bunch of other ones around, maximum fees that can be collected. And then there's some state by state, usury rules, things like that. I'm not going to get into that here. Okay. And so where a lot of the confusion is, you talk to different people, some of them will tell you, oh, if it's seller finance, anything goes. It's like the Wild West. I can do whatever I want. And that's not true. But there are some caveats depending on how many loans you're doing per year and what type. Okay. And there's basically Three of them I'm going to talk about. There's kind of the one loan per year rule, the three loan per year rule, and the five loan per year rule. Those aren't official rules. That's like the Dan version of what I'm calling them. So the one loan per year rule. So there is a carve out saying that if you're doing one loan in a year, that you can do it what I call Wild West style. Don't have to follow Dodd-Frank, don't have to follow TRID. Do whatever you want. However, there's a huge caveat to this that a lot of people miss. It's not just one per year. The catch is you have to personally own the property. So this can't be an investment property. And the intent behind this rule is like, hey, I'm selling my house to a family member. They're going to take it over. And so in that case, they don't want you to have a lot of encumbrances. So it doesn't apply to investments. It doesn't apply to, it's got to be like natural persons involved. We can't have entities and things like that. Those don't qualify. So if you're doing any kind of investment, which usually when people are doing seller finance, right, it's some investment related, this does not apply. So for like 99.9% of the people doing one loan per year, this doesn't even apply anyways. Where this rule gets misconstrued is they go, oh, I can do one per year Wild West style, and then they think they can do like a million of them Wild West style, and then they think they can do them in LLCs and for investment purposes. You cannot do that as well. That's where that misconception of where I hear people say this all the time because I talk to like multiple people on the phone every day about these, so I get a real good read on where the misunderstandings are. They go, oh, well, seller finance, anything goes. Not true at all. So that's the one loan per year rule. The next one that causes a lot of confusion is what I call the three loan per year rule. So you can create up to three loans per year without using an RMLO. An RMLO is a residential mortgage loan originator. It's someone licensed to originate loans. And the confusion here is they go, oh, well, if I'm doing three or fewer, I'm back to Wild West style. Anything goes. No TRID, no Dodd-Frank, no nothing. I just stick my finger in my ear and do whatever I want. And the thing that people miss on this one is, while you're not required to have a mortgage license involved in the deal anywhere, you still have to follow the Dodd-Frank Ability-to-Repay rules, right? So if you do the predatory lending thing where you collect like some 30-40% down payment, you don't know or care if the borrower can pay or not, and then they default and you're just going to rinse them out, foreclose, get another borrower, then you could potentially get into trouble for that because you still have to validate that the borrower has the ability to repay. And so following the ability to repay rules, there's 8 elements of ability to repay documented in Dodd-Frank, but basically it says that you've got to make a good faith determination that the borrower can repay, and that's by verifying credit, pulling credit as part of that, verifying their income, their debts, residual income, making sure they can afford the loan. So whether you're doing, so you can do less, you can do three or fewer per year without the license, but you're still following Dodd-Frank and all that good stuff. And then there's the 5 loan per year rule, which to me is really like a big nothing burger because there is a rule, and this is super confusing, and I don't know why they would do it this way, but you can do up to 5 years, up to 5 loans per year without following TRID. Meaning, if you're doing up to 5, you don't have to send out loan estimates 7 business days before closing, closing disclosures 3 business days before closing. But if you're already doing ability to repay and you're using someone to do that, their service, like call the underwriter or another RMLO, they're always going to be set up to do those. So there's no reason not to do both. So technically, you could do 3 or 4 loans a year, or do, you could do 4 loans a year, follow ability to repay, not send the TRID disclosures. I don't know why on earth anyone would ever do that. So to me, that's kind of a nothing burger rule. However, when you get down to it, right? As I've gone through these, this rule of 1, 3, 5, my opinion is none of it matters. And the reason why none of it matters is I've got a lot of good reasons why I want to follow Dodd-Frank and TRID, whether I'm required to or not. Number one, part of going through that Dodd-Frank process is underwriting your borrower, right? So if you're creating a loan, I don't care if it's a seller finance loan of a property sale for owner occupied, or you're buying an existing note or doing an auto loan, critical loan. Like if you're making a loan or just making a real estate investment, it doesn't have to be a loan, right? You want to underwrite the deal. That always makes sense. Like who does deals without underwriting them? And if you're making a loan, you definitely want to underwrite your borrower and make sure they have the means to pay you back. Now, you might say, well, okay, then why does Dodd-Frank exist? Well, Dodd-Frank exists because prior to the financial crisis, you had lenders making loans where the borrowers couldn't pay them back. You could say, well, why was it okay for them? It was because they had, at the time, the ability to sell the loans to what they called in The Big Short, like idiots in Dusseldorf. There were people buying the loans without underwriting, and they all got scorched. That's not really the case now. There's also some things in the regulations saying talking about skin in the game and different things. But you know, if you're creating a loan, you've got a pretty big incentive to underwrite the borrower, whether it's required in regulation or not. So that's really number one why you want to do this stuff. And complying with TRID kind of goes along with that, right? Like you want to make sure everything's disclosed to the borrower. They've had the ability to read the fine print. Like everybody's on the same page. When that happens, you're going to have a better borrower. They're going to be less likely to default. So number one, you want to underwrite them anyways. The number two reason for following Dodd-Frank and TRID is should you ever decide to sell a loan or sell a partial. Now, I also talked to people, including one yesterday, who might be new to seller finance or notes, don't even realize that you can sell a note, or they might not realize you can sell a partial of a note. Okay. Now, if you ever decide in the future to sell your note or sell some of the payments on the note, you really want to be able to sell to an institutional type buyer. The institutional buyers, there are some smaller banks who will buy this stuff. Number one, they're going to pay top dollar compared to an individual. Number two, they're going to be a lot easier to work with. I've sold a number of loans and I've sold them to individuals and I've sold them to institutions. You're way better when you can sell to an institution. But one of the things those institutions care about a lot, because they are highly regulated, right, is they care about how the loans they're holding on their books were originated, whether they did the origination or not. So your institutional buyer wants to see the loan estimate and the closing disclosure and all the appropriate timelines followed, especially if you're talking about somebody like First National Acceptance. They also want to know the borrower has the ability to repay. They don't care whether so much necessarily whether you're like, oh, well, I did 4 loans per year or 3 loans per year, so I had to do this, I didn't do that. They really, your life is going to be easier if you can just give them the package and show them that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted, and you don't have to delve into the minutia of, well, there's this caveat and there was this case. Like if you just have it, then you're good. Um, the third reason, so selling the loan is key, and you're also going to get, way more money should you ever decide the loan. And the thing with selling a loan, sometimes people say, well, it's not my plan, and that's cool, but it, it's always helpful to have an asset be liquid, right? Because if you create a 30-year loan, your intent may not be to sell it, but in 10 years or 20 years, something may change. You may want to sell it, right? Or if you're doing like a wrap loan subject to deal, and the underlying gets called due on sale, there might be some scenarios where you want to try to sell that loan to unwind the deal. The third reason you want to follow this stuff anyways is it makes sure that your loan is enforceable, right? So when you create the loan, God forbid the borrower defaults, and then God forbid, you have to foreclose and the borrower fights you and tries to say that you didn't follow the consumer rules. You don't want to get into a negotiation with a judge who I guarantee you does not know these rules in detail over, whether what was required and what was not. You just want to say, no, 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 we did all the stuff. We followed Dodd-Frank. Here's the 1008. We showed the ability to repay. We collected all this information. Here are the trade disclosures. T's crossed, I's dotted, follow the rules, done. You'll snuff that really quick. Now, granted, that enforceability is a little bit of a corner case, but it could really hurt if you were to run into that. And then the other thing is your underwriting and RMLO costs can be passed on to the borrower at closing. So doing all this compliance stuff is basically free for you as the lender, right? So you're getting your deal underwritten, you're understanding the risk, and you're checking the boxes on all the compliance stuff, and you're giving yourself the ability to sell the loan later, and you're making sure that it's enforceable and the borrower is paying for it. So why wouldn't you do it? You're really not saving anything by not. Similar thing on the loan servicing side. So sometimes people want to self-service loans, and if it's owner-occupied, I don't recommend that because if if you're afraid of the compliance rules on the origination side, they're more intense on the servicing side. Again, when you create your seller finance loan, you can write into your contract that the borrower will pay the $25 to $35 per month loan servicing fee. I haven't actually seen a borrower push back on that yet. So you get your compliance on the origination side and on the servicing side done for free. It's offloading a lot of work from you, and you end up with a better loan. So hopefully that clarified things. If you still have questions about that, definitely give me an email at dan@calltheunderwriter.com, or you can leave if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave a comment. I try to answer those when I can. So hopefully that clears up some confusion and makes your lives a little bit easier. So that's it for now, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks.